iot, right? A patriot focused on the patria, the country, right? Id, iot. So if you wonder where idiot comes from, it's an individual that's essentially just totally focused on himself and can't really have an outer, connection to other people or something of that sort. So that's just the root of the word, right? But ego, the self, must exist in order for there to be phenomena. So someone is having the experience of something, and granted, all you can know is the phenomena itself. So you can't see the thing that's causing the experience, nor can you actually ever discover the true self. You look at a mirror and you think, aha, that's me. Well, that's actually your reflection. It's not really you. So we get this from David Hume, who explores that problem a little bit. Berkeley already discusses it a little bit. But at the same time, you end up then with the issue of me not knowing myself in a sense that is persistent. And of course, with all of our contemporary science pointing out that it's a constant set of processes going on, in a sense we can say, well, you're not really a persistent self, you're constantly changing, like that river that you can't step into twice. I mentioned you can't even step into anything twice with the same foot, because the foot's changing, etc. But that's, in a sense, nonsense. We can't really deal with thinking that everything is not categorical. All of our thinking, ever since Aristotle, and perhaps before, is categorical, right? And where does that come from? Well, Kant argues that we have kind of a set of categories that are universal. I talked about this already a little bit. Compared it to Aristotle's categories. Notice that you get time. Everything includes time elapse. Kind of an interesting thing in thinking about whether or not a fetus is aware of time, or even an infant. Is an infant aware of time? And the concern is, well, if the fetus at least is unaware of categories, of events, and so on, it doesn't really sense a change from one set of events to another, and so in that sense it doesn't really experience time. How could it? How could a fetus experience time elapsing? On the other hand, that seems like, well, but how do you know? None of us remember what it was like to be a fetus, as far as I know. And there might be some folks that remember certain things, but loud bangs and stuff, I don't know. What would they say they remember? How far back do you remember things as an infant? Any of you thought, what's your first memory?
I got a concussion when I was 3.
You remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know how old I was, but I was on a scooter and my tire went into a sewer. You know how they have the grate thing? And it went in and it just locked and my face went slam. And my tooth went right through here, so I got a scar. I remember that. That hurt. But I don't know how old I was when that happened. But I have to be older, because if you're using a scooter, the kind with one foot, I still remember that. My dad made the handle for it. A little white stick that he painted white. However, actually the first very clear memory I have, I was putzing about on a kind of a beige rug. I could feel the rug. And I'm looking around, and what's happening is we got a new TV. This is our first TV. It was a big vanilla case. I could see it sitting there, and I could see the installer, because I had to have an installer at the time. And he had put the antenna up on the roof, and he had the 75 ohm antenna wire sitting there that had been brought into the house, but he hadn't hooked it up to the TV yet. And so I saw it, and I remember thinking, oh, this goes in here. So I took the 75 ohm antenna wire and I put it in the electric socket. Do not do that. Because I remember kind of like hopping around. And I looked up at the couch, and the installer was explaining things to my parents on left and right. And all of a sudden, he looked at me. My parents didn't notice me, but he looked at me and he lunged forward and saved me. So I remember that very clearly. And I've been a philosophy major ever since. That last part wasn't true. Yes, I don't know how far back we remember. Is time something that would actually be something that we would categorize as indicating that we are now conscious? So if we say that a fetus being able to recognize time, who knows, we could scan the brain and see if it's recognizing time passing. Will that be possible someday? And we could say, aha! In the last trimester, the fetus is conscious. That would be interesting. But for Kant, all human beings have to experience time. Nothing can happen unless we're experiencing time passing. And then if something has dimensions, it also has to take up space. And I did the thing, in Kant, he uses an orange, but I never remember to bring an orange. So instead of holding up an orange and saying, look at the space that this orange takes, and then keep looking at that space and take the orange away. But notice the space is actually still there. So it's not the orange that creates the space. We give that space to the things in our experience. So time, space, and all the other categories, which are remarkably similar to Aristotle's 10 categories: quantity, quality, relationships, etc. So Kant says that we impose this structure on phenomena, and so it's not that we can see that the phenomena has these characteristics, and this is why this is such a revolution, he thinks. I think he's right, actually. And that is that instead of thinking, as Aristotle did, that objects have all of these characteristics, objects and things in our experience only have all those characteristics because that's how human beings perceive things. We impose those characteristics on. So it's not that this magic marker is one thing, but it has many parts. How can it have so many parts and yet it's one thing? The Greeks called this an antinomony, and that means that they couldn't solve this problem. Well, now, thanks to Kant, the problem goes away, because everything has unity, identity, and everything has parts. We can take everything apart. It's not because the thing doesn't have unity, doesn't have parts. That's because we break everything we experience up into all of these characteristics. Whether the thing has parts, whether it's unity, for Kant, you can't find that out. But everything will have those characteristics, not because of this problematic characteristic of the nature of things, but because that's the way all of our human experience is for us. Now, typically it's easy for us to think of, well, if I see a triangle, I automatically know that it's a triangle and that it has three sides, mathematical figures and things. Those are intuitively obvious. You see a square. Now, granted, sometimes you get those weird little cubes drawn in such a way that you can't tell whether the cube is sitting this way or that way. It's kind of like an Escher diagram. Remember, we have a blue tube made of the pipeline pieces that were left over, or hopefully, gaps in the pipeline going down from the North Slope to Valdez. But they took several pieces of such that pipeline material and painted it blue and stuck it at the entrance to the parking lot at the library, the old library, which you know where that is. You know where the blue tube. That's supposed to look like an Escher diagram. Where wait a minute, how could this go here? But it's actually in physical space, and so it isn't impossible. It's obviously just a mechanical construction. Newly painted, by the way. It was really starting to look awful for a while. But so, for Kant, because of the nature of human categorical understanding, everything of that sort is understood intuitively. But he goes on to argue that in the moral realm, when we're faced with a moral decision, a moral problem, a moral crisis, we intuitively know the right thing to do. And he calls this the categorical imperative. So when we ask, why not? I still have it here. Why not? Let's ask, what is Kant's categorical imperative? Let's see what it says. So this is an absolute universal foundational principle. And the argument he gives is essentially whenever a human sees a particular problem, a moral problem, we know what the right thing to do is. And so the formula he gives us is that one should act only according to that maxim whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law. It should never harm someone. You should never lie. You should never, or whatever, you name the moral principle. But the point is you should make that universal. It's a law for everyone. And as far as he's concerned, this is intuitively obvious to all humans. The problem that many of us have is that if we do what is intuitively obligatory, it might end up with bad results for us. So in this kind of a situation, a lot of classes will talk about, the Nazis coming to the door and saying, do you have any Jewish people hiding in your attic or in your house? And the people, no, of course not. But if they follow Kant, and they do, you can't lie. So yes, there are. There's a Jewish family upstairs hiding behind our bookshelf. And everybody's appalled at that idea that a family would be obligated to lie, or not to lie in that kind of circumstance, and so on. That's a favorite. But there's lots of such situation. If you wake up one morning and you're connected by tubes to a violinist, and it's skip the violinist, let's go to a viola player. Zul Bailey is connected to you. Nobody knows who Zul Bailey is. Yo-Yo Ma? No. Taylor Swift. You're connected to Taylor Swift. Okay. So Taylor Swift is connected to you, and she's only alive because she's sucking her life force from you. I mean, it's not destroying you, but it's totally limiting your freedom because you can't